Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Deep Random Talks. Today, I'm with Carla, my awesome host on decentralized science topics, and Eugene, our awesome guest. Thanks for joining us, both of you. What's new with you, Carla?
What's new with me? I made it to Lisbon, so I just got into town a couple days ago, and I will be here for the next 2 weeks because there's a bunch of really cool stuff going on. So, a bunch of DeSci related and adjacent topics that are going to come up over the next couple days. So, I'm hoping to go to a lot of events, meet some cool people, and yeah, I was hoping for better weather, but I guess it's okay.
I remember doing a half marathon in Lisbon probably 5 years ago. The
Yeah,
weather was pretty nice, but then when you were running, I was pretty much dying because it's still very warm for running. Anyway,
I can
Eugene, what's new?
imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but I loved it. Like I stayed in the old town area, and the architecture is absolutely gorgeous there,
But
and the food.
marathon through Lisbon, that because it's so hilly here, I would just
Hmm.
die.
Oh, no, no, no! The course was along the river and on the bridge.
Ah,
So
beautiful.
it wasn't super hill. Like, I mean, there was some hills, obviously,
Yeah,
but
I guess to and from the bridge, there's still the
Mm.
incline
of
decline
I
there.
mean, well, the ironically, the week before that, I did one in Oxford. That was super hilly. Like, it was, but that's my personal best. So anyway,
Hey.
I, I I I think it was just the weather. Like, it was perfect temperature. It was drizzling. Anyway, Eugene, what's new with you? What's happening in your life these days?
Hey, I'm your hey, Carla. Yeah, new on my end is mainly at Scurf. We've kind of had a change where since our beginning, we've been funded by a single group, and that's kind of starting to expand. So now adding the joys of fundraising to our responsibilities. So yeah, that's been its own journey and a very exciting and fruitful one. And yeah, it looks like we'll be collaborating with Protocol Labs, which I know Carla's about to head to a lot of the PL events in Lisbon, or is there now. So yeah, it's exciting to see how we can get to collaborate more with them in the future and see who else we start working with. And yeah, on a personal note, I moved back to New York and just getting settled in my place here. And I actually just had a couple DSci folks crashing over, and one of Carla's DSci Labs colleagues has been crashing as well. So it's been lovely getting to just get to host and see a bunch of DSci friends who are rolling through New York.
Beautiful. In the spirit of Web3, you're just going completely communal. I see.
That's
Uh,
the long term hope. Yeah, I guess we'll see if we come back to it throughout the conversation.
awesome. So what's everybody drinking? I'm having this Japanese green tea that I picked up from Chinatown last night.
Not bad. I'm just having some basic OJ.
Mm, all right.
I'm guessing I will be the first person and possibly the last on the podcast drinking some wonderful chicken broth at roughly what are we at 9:45 in the morning. So yeah,
Wow.
I have some chronic health issues where a chicken broth is a very nourishing and replenishing beverage and is a staple of my consumption. So I have to be off caffeine at the moment. So yeah, it's water and broth is pretty much my liquid diet these days. I eat as well, just those are the liquids I consume.
There's nothing wrong with chicken broth. All right, thank you so much for being on the show. And Carla, you met Eugene through the DSI community, and you were very interested to bringing him on the show. So tell us a little about how did you meet, and what was exciting for you about what Eugene is doing.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the way we met was that was in Amsterdam. So there was a conference in Amsterdam around ETH Amsterdam, a couple of other Ethereum related, Web3 related events. And so I had just started working together with DeSci Labs, just gotten to know that crew. And they were co organizing this event called DeSci Day, where they rented out I think it was like a theater, and they rented out the whole place to
Improv
have
comedy
just a
theater.
couple different projects from the DeSci space come on and like show what they've been working on. Because I think a couple months prior there was like the kind of maybe first unofficial DeSci event in Denver. So that was a couple of months later. Then everybody was like coming in and like talking about what we've been up to. And so Eugene was co-organizing that together with Eric from our group. And so I was helping out Eric organize a little bit. And then I just met Eugene in this crazy headspace. I'm like, da, 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 we got to do this. And what about the tickets? And like, no, no. It was very stressful. Everybody was like on edge. So it's an intense environment to meet somebody. But still, I had a good time meeting him because Eugene is like this very warm, welcoming, and kind person who is very community oriented and very inclusive of everybody. And so I got a very positive vibe, even though he was stressed out as hell, I think. So that was good. And so I was super interested in getting Eugene on because the stuff he's working on and the way he does it specifically is just, I feel like, very powerful for the entire D-size space. I think it's one of the earliest projects in the space as well. And so, I just wanted to have the chance to like dive deeper into that and have everybody else learn about it.
100%. And since Eugene, you are starting your fundraising process, give us your elevator pitch. What are we doing here?
Sure, going right into the elevator pitch. So, sure. Should I pull my? I'm debating doing for. We're just about at Halloween. I'm debating doing like a Billy Mays costume for it, so that way I just have to do a Billy Mays here selling Scurf and what? Yeah, so that's probably a little too aggressive for 9:30 in the morning right now, though. But yeah, so SCURF, or Smart Contract Research Forum, we prefer going by SCURF, but we're a grant-funded organization supporting research in the Web3 space. We do not focus on the actual primary research ourselves. We're much more focused on building the infrastructure to connect those who are kind of purely in the world of theory and those who are in the world of building better, so that there can be a more of a robust flow of high quality research ideas to the people building, and sort of build tighter feedback loops between the people researching and the people building. So we're very much focused on kind of a human network first approach towards trying to support the research space, which we feel like is a very different approach than everyone else who usually comes in with a product first approach. And so we're much more focused on kind of the people and the communities and the culture that needs to form as the foundation, and then using something like a moderated forum as a place for long-term discussion. And then we're kind of layering in a different kind of value add projects for the space on top of that.
Beautiful. So I'm going to ask you a clarification question right away. So on a high level, what you said makes sense, but give me a use case, give me an example. What does everything you said mean?
Yeah, as of today or potential future state? I'm just wondering what the scope of projects I should be including are.
Tell me the most recent one and the most exciting imaginary one.
Cool. Yeah. So right now the idea. So for example, I'm talking to someone who's a PhD student at UIUC, who her focus on her PhD is in the security space. And I guess by the time this podcast will be released, within a couple of weeks, the paper that she's currently working on will actually be coming out at a conference early next year. But basically, right, academics, their main incentives is to get the actual virtual PDF out of their actual published research into some formal conference or journal. And along the way, there's a question of, well, how do you most appropriately get feedback on something like that? Of course, there's informal peer review, there's tap your network, there's the phone a friend option of like, hey, all my PhD buddies at different universities, can you give this a read? And that's fantastic. But there's always the chance that, given that it's social network based, that you're kind of limited to people who think like you, who are coming from a similar background as yourself. There's kind of potential danger of being captured in a bubble there. So what we offered to this individual and their advisor was, hey, do you want us to bring together a bunch of DAO operators to off the record, not recorded? We could just have a private conversation of your research team and a bunch of people who might be interested in the kind of frameworks and learning that you're talking about. And so the hope is that we're going to plan this kind of session for mid-November, which will be sort of and we've done versions of this. We did this with a CMU PhD who is specifically interested in offboarding in DAOs, which is a thorny question, and we don't want to put people on literally on the record in a public discussion of like, hey, so how do you get rid of people in your DAO, right? Like that can actually be a complicated emotional discussion. So we want to recognize that. And so with this, in the second iteration, we want to do sort of a closed door discussion with the research team and relevant industry participants, and then host a public discussion as soon as that research team is comfortable on it. Get a write up of their research on our forum to use this as a way of giving them feedback and to start a long term moderated discussion on the focal point of their research. I don't know how much their research is public yet, so I don't want to be too specific with naming it in case it accidentally
Yeah.
divulges their team. So hopefully that gives a sense of roughly where we're at today with some of these value adds for researchers. And I'm also happy to mention the industry side, but don't want to belabor it as well.
So can I put my investor? I'm not an investor, but I'm going to put my investor hat on. So can I think about this as sort of openreview.net, cohort-based over openreview.net, more hands-on? And so that's one question. And the second is, why wouldn't I put it on a subreddit and ask people for feedback? Like, what's the more fundamental problem there?
Yeah, I'll start with the latter one. Good luck posting that on our cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin or Ethereum, and trying to have a real discussion, right? So that was part of the impetus for starting Scurf initially. Was it's amazing that there's ETH research for the Ethereum ecosystem. Where is that for the Web3 ecosystem, right? What is the version of that that can really not just be focused on the deeply technical topics, but can touch on anything that's research related for any Web3 ecosystem? So that was the initial inspiration, because there aren't great alternatives to it, right? If you go very narrow in terms of focus, right? If you want to do cryptography in Ethereum, yeah, ETH research is amazing. If you want to, I'm sure other ecosystems have similar versions. There's 0x Park for just cryptography. There's groups, like RNDAO and Talent DAO and others that just do governance stuff, but each has their own focus that's more narrow. What we're and that's beneficial to them. And the other internet is a great example from the governance perspective. They are providing the high value they're able to provide because they're narrow, because they choose a specific topic, they amass expertise in that topic, and then they write very deeply and intelligently on that topic. Because we're not trying to produce research, we think actually focusing on a single domain is overly narrowing for us, as opposed to expanding to the appropriate level, which is at the industry level of Web3, and then thinking of the systems at that level. So how do we get the cryptographers connected with the governance people, connected with the consensus computer science people, et cetera, et cetera? Recognizing that all of these groups want hyper expertise. Sometimes they just want like-minded folks who are at their level and can poke and prod at the depth of their ideas. And sometimes they want to be in an interdisciplinary environment. So that itself, right? It's trying to sort of initially in my mind, it was like, oh, we're trying to create the best venue space, the single room, massive room for everyone who's interested in Web3 research. And over time, the analogy that I started using in my head was much more akin to, we kind of want to create the big space and venue with a lot of different rooms in it. And our forum and our Discord, they're the big public hall. They're where everyone is welcome. Please come hang out and then see all of these other journeys you can go on. Do you just want to go talk to cryptographers? Great. There's a cryptography corner and you could just hang out with people who only care about that topic. Do you really want to be at the intersection of governance, computer science, and mechanism design? Amazing. Here are 3 separate rooms into each one of those topics, and then the place where they're all hanging out and coming together. So we're still in a lot of different ways trying to figure this out. And, it's not a clean cut, where does this come from? And the whole reason we stepped into the DeSci world is because it's not as though this has clean cut answers in more well established disciplines. How to make knowledge better or knowledge more efficient or anything, any kind of vague, pithy statement like that, it doesn't have clear answers of how to do that. So we have been in a very fortunate position to date, where our founding funder has gave us kind of 2 years runway to really open-endedly experiment. And now, as we're starting to bring in other organizations, we're really trying to hone in on the areas that we've gotten really positive feedback on, in terms of what is a value add that no private company is providing, because it's a value add on the system level and not on my individual company level.
So I get the okay, so you built this venue space with different rooms. Sounds really cool. Probably a beautiful venue. How do you get the people inside?
Right, and that's where I very much appreciate that I got to join Scurf. So I guess quick founding story with Scurf. So it was founded by Rich Brown, who used to be the head of governance at MakerDAO, and Sergey Nazarov, who's the CEO, or I think now that it's just co-founder at Chainlink. But anyway, the two of them came up with this idea of, hey, forum, moderated long-term discussion. How do we get people sharing knowledge better? And we were very lucky that Sergey and Chainlink were very open to kind of taking a step back and giving us this runway so that we can experiment and grow, because we were worried as we were going to start reaching out to people. And it's like, hey, we want to have all of these kind of neutral third-party status activities and interactions. Oh, but look at Chainlink's name everywhere, right? We knew that if we came in like that, that would just make us seem like an extension of Chainlink Labs. And that in of itself is not a bad thing. That just wasn't the mission of Scurf. And so we were very lucky that both Sergey and Chainlink were understanding in providing us space and not forcing us to be like, oh, be puppets or parrots of Chainlink, but really go focus on building your quality. And by doing that, you will benefit Chainlink and the rest of the ecosystem. And that really helped us in terms of just being able to honestly come to academics and just see what their needs are, see how we can help them grow. And it's been very interesting where, earlier in our formation, we still do have this research summary idea that anyone who writes formal academic research can come and summarize it on our forum to make it more approachable. For the first year and almost year and a half of our forum, we were paying people directly for it. And then due to macro conditions setting in, and we just had to tighten our budget a little bit, we paused that program. But we're very happy to see that we, weirdly enough, are just still growing in terms of overall response rate. Like that did not affect the rate at which primary authors want to come summarize on our forum at all, which shows that, right, initially, maybe we had to financially incentivize here, right? Maybe we had to dangle a 1,000 DAI grant to say, hey, that's what it's going to take to get you here to summarize your research. Now people look, and we have 2 years of sort of track record, and quite an active forum. We are partnering with Taptive on new writing cohorts to get more and more people engaging with this kind of content, and we're trying to better figure out what does it mean to create mentorship and skill-based acquisition pathways for people to interact with research and write about research and talk about research. So yeah, I mean, it's like you're alluding to, it's the typical chicken and the egg problem with building anything that's kind of human and network based. And that's where I was very lucky to work with someone like Rich, who he and I are very much aligned, where it's you get people in by putting your head down, doing the work, and showing value, not by leading marketing first and let us bedazzle you with all of these amazing things, and then you come and realize that it's an empty, barely even a structure of a building, right? So we were much more of the mindset of it's okay if no one hears about us for the first year, but then when they do, we want to show to things actually happening. And that's where ETH Denver was our first real public foray. And the forum had been around for just over a year, had been around for almost 13 months at that point. So it was already much easier to start gaining traction when you can point to something that already had hundreds of people interacting and posting on it. Yeah.
Very interesting. So I want to take us back to the world before Scurf. So what was that world like? What was happening in your life? What was the inciting incident that was like, okay, I need to do this, and then the opportunity came on and you jumped on it, as you said.
Yeah, that's a big one. It was, I guess for me personally, it was also, weird timing where on a very personal and professional level, it has very much been part of a very healthy and amazing kind of growth journey. But then just in the greater social context, it's almost very interesting timing with COVID just persisting. So positives and negatives abound everywhere. But yeah, I mean, in the journey of my own life, so without taking it too far back, but my general thing was that my family immigrated to the United States when I was a kid. I was born in the former Soviet Union, but was raised here. And so in I was raised in a very kind of Soviet mentality of like, hey, we immigrated here so that you can go get a good paying job. And you know what pays well? Finance, law, or medicine. So you're going to do one of those three things. And I realize when I chat about these things, it might sound like I'm critical of my family, which is not the intention as much as they were coming from a specific time and place. They had no clue, right? Like if you're a math PhD, you're just going to go do math academia. There wasn't the idea of, oh, a PhD is actually a stepping stone to an interesting career beyond academia, right? For them, my mom has a PhD and my dad, they both have PhDs, and in their mind, it's like, oh, well, you don't want to be an academic, so you don't want to you don't want to go get your PhD. You just want to minimize your amount of education to maximize your revenue, and that's what's going to make you happy. And maybe if I went through the lives that they went through, maybe it would have, but I didn't. I was born here in a very different landscape of privilege and opportunity availability. And right in Russia, as Russian Jews, we were a minority population. In the U.S. growing up, especially in the 90s into 2000s, Judaism kind of got submerged into broad whiteness, which then becomes the majority here. And so it was, and even that its own is like its own interesting thread to unpack depending on where you are in the States. But for the high level overview, it was very normal for like the Russian Jewish diaspora to push their kids towards one of those three topics. And then as tech and IT kind of grew more and more towards that, but that was still towards like back office coding, as opposed to like, ooh, you're going to go be the innovative young software engineer doing cool new things. Tech was still very much seen of like, oh, you're a programmer in a back room. It wasn't glorious. It was seen as like, oh, well, we can go be a programmer at a bank and that's a stable job. And so, yeah, it was interesting where from an early point I chose finance due to the fact that I understood an undergrad sufficed and 4 years was the least amount of education and the other alternative pathways my family was laying out. So for a long time in my first 7 years of my career were in the finance direction, and I kept trying to kind of convince myself that this was supposed to be my pathway, and it really wasn't. And then I went to grad school, and then I stuck around and convinced the university to hire me after grad school. And still through all of this, I was still just trying to find of like what's the thing that truly fulfills a deeper yearning, sort of and really started putting it into much more existential questions around questions of meaning in life and landscape of responsibility and elements of loneliness and all these kinds of things. And about 2 years ago, yes, that would have been the first summer into COVID, I got Lyme disease. So it was just about 2 months in. My roommates and I were super serious about COVID. We barely left the house. We finally go leave for a weekend camping, and I come back with Lyme disease. So in the whatever, in the grand scheme of things, I'm still insanely lucky because it just demolished my body and mind immediately. Whereas like my mom and so many folks that I know, they have slow creep of symptoms over years, which in my opinion is just so much more physically and mentally debilitating to deal with. So as crappy as it was of my entire body just shutting down within 2 weeks, at least I knew what I was dealing with as a result. And we were able to kind of carpet bomb my insides with the appropriate amount of antibiotics. But that, I've had chronic GI issues, as I mentioned, with my broth, and I've had some other, I recognize more health concerns as a 34-year-old than many of my peers. But nonetheless, this was a whole different beast. And this sent me down an existential rabbit hole that it took me kind of many months to unpack the origin of. But I looking back on it, I remember a clear point where I was maybe 10 days into Lyme, where I was waking up 30 times a night, just drenched in sweat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I was in constant physical pain. I couldn't move my muscles. There was a random joint in my body every day that would just switch it up and would just be on fire, that like if I even remotely came anywhere close to touching it, it felt like it was broken. So it was not a fun state to be in. And it was like 10 days ago, I was normal. I was on a run. And like now I'm here another 10 days and I just have to be dead. Like there's no way this can keep progressing at this kind of exponential decay with room to keep going down. Just I am going to have organ failure soon. And so finally I went to the doctor, which the fact that it took me that long to wait is its own idiocy, especially because I was like covered in welts and other stuff and yay being a stupid dude. But anyway, so like I finally went to the doctors and they even asked to show me off to all the young doctors because they're like, we don't see Lyme this bad usually. Can we show you off to all the youngins? But anyway, just that very different type of emotional interaction with mortality. And this is coming as someone who, like when I am out camping and, on a very intense hike, I am that weirdo to go sit on the ledge. And like, I like those kinds of things. And candidly, just in my own mental health journey, I have dealt with kind of depression and suicidal ideation and things along those lines. And this was just a whole nother beast in terms of my relation with mortality. And yeah, that really started a much more focused, structured approach towards trying to understand what are all the constituent components of my depression and my mental health landscape, and how do I build a healthier relationship with them. And kind of working through that was what finally sort of sealed the deal with how I approach my own depression, which is that I actually see it as part of my superpowers. I don't see it as a disease or as a crutch or as an issue, but I see my ability to be so emotionally attuned to others and empathetic and community oriented. These are all very much a result of certain internal elements that I've had to deal with, and I know that I would not have been the same without these elements. So I realize I'm starting to meander down some side rabbit holes. So I'm happy to kind of take that wherever, but that was especially just dealing with Lyme and working through meaning in life and the context of what role my career was playing. That was what finally kind of hit the nail on the head of like, this is not where I want to be. I want to jump into crypto. I interviewed at a bunch of great companies. It still didn't feel totally right because I'm like, if I just jump into a single company, you kind of have to drink their Kool-Aid. I mean, it's kind of the point. You can't really be passionately working somewhere and not slightly drinking the Kool-Aid. And I just wanted something system and ecosystem level. And I was like, but that doesn't exist. And then I met Rich and Scurf and I was like, yes. And so like I started and I very quickly went from just part-time project management work to within 2 months being head of ops. And I guess, yeah, announcement that's coming out a little bit after us recording. But Rich is actually going to be stepping back to advisor as of Halloween this year, and I'll be taking over as executive director of Scurf. So yeah, it's been quite a ride and roller coaster, and an amazing transition and change of the last 2 years.
Whoa, congratulations on the new role. I'm
Thank you.
so excited for you. That's going to be great. Wow, that's awesome. Um, so, okay, we went really deep for a second and then we just went, and now I'm going to be executive director. So I want to double click on the transition from like existential questions, like, okay, I don't want to do finance and like thinking about mortality and like, I don't know, there's got to be something more in life. What made you just like, you said then you wanted to go into crypto? Like, why? What's that? Where
Yeah.
can you establish that link for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got really into crypto back in 2016, or my own version of really into crypto. I didn't play around with anything to my own finances chagrin, but nonetheless, I was very interested ideologically in what crypto had to offer. And the part that got me most excited initially was like global payment rail, inclusive financial system, and I do still believe in that. Though now being closer to the space for 6 years, I see that that's also an idea and not reality. Like we're not actually helping a lot of people on the ground. So that's where my own journey with crypto became, like super, rosy eyed and everything's amazing and crypto is going to solve everything. And where the heck did this magic technology fall from? And that was 2015, 2016. And then as I went back to grad school in 17 and like really, really went into the tech in 16 through 18, I was like, oh, I was just understanding it at a 40,000 foot level. I didn't understand anything about how this worked. And digging into it, I kind of, yeah, just saw more of the realistic challenges. But the bit for me that was most exciting, and that this still holds for me, is I do think there are a couple of narratives of crypto that, regardless of what ecosystem, chain, whatever, they will have impacts on society. So I do think that this idea of removing middlemen from organizations like finance and everything like that can be really powerful. I'm still interested in seeing how it works out because I don't know. It depends. There's a lot of libertarian flavor around crypto, and I'm genuinely not one to be like, oh, regulation is always evil. Sometimes you read enough history of capitalism, and you see how regulation has saved lives as well. So it's like, how do you create a balance there? But anyway, the bit of crypto that truly is most exciting for me is the zk knowledge and privacy enablement side and the governance side. Those are two that I truly think are going to be massively powerful for individuals. The ZK and privacy side is even more thorny and complicated. And I can pull up this piece, but there's this one piece, I'm forgetting the author's name, but I believe it's called The Moral Character of Cryptography or Cryptographic Innovation or something like that. And it sort of is a very interesting piece that both talks about the role of cryptography and kind of leveling power on a nation state level on a certain degree. And those who are aware of like the history of cryptography and any kind of like from the enigmas in World War II and all the code breaking and all that jazz through the 80s and 90s is a very interesting one. But for me personally and emotionally, the part that gets me truly just super, super excited is the governance side. Because, right, if you're a human with the internet, you don't need to spend a lot of time on it these days to be like, oh my God, look at all these examples of how horrible humanity is. And we're all these horrible creatures, and all humans are selfish monsters. And I even like throwing around phrases like humans are selfish monsters all the time. But in reality, and somewhere I didn't prepare with the physical book, but somewhere around here, I have Rutger Bregman's Humankind book. And I really like these examples that truly both show a different version of history, or not a different version as if they're telling an alternate tale, but they're just telling the history with the marketing around the history, and then realizing how the history got changed for certain groups' end goals. And at the end of the day, so many issues, especially like my master's degree was in public policy, which got me a lot closer to the political realm and political discourse. And I was at Carnegie Mellon, so it was a very interesting mix of like artificial intelligence and political discourse. And there's just so many examples where just humans don't see each other as humans. And so it's very easy to say on an individual level, we need to learn how to love ourselves, how to love our peers, and all these things. And as someone who like, if you ask me what one of my most active mental health challenges, it's learning to love myself. And I will immediately say that I think phrases like loving myself is just hippy dippy BS too. So it's complicated, right? But nonetheless, it was, I don't know, just this fundamental element of wanting to just being so excited by all of this energy and innovation towards how do humans human better together. And I remember we were interviewing Zach Anderson from Coordinate as part of our own podcast last year. And we were chatting with him about the tool and just kind of how's it going? What have people been asking? And he's like, yeah, people keep asking for tool upgrades that pretty much are a way of saying, I don't want to have a hard conversation. Can you make a tool to automate away a hard conversation? And the beauty of Coordinate, and in my opinion, a lot of the very interesting governance experimentation is that you can't. And that's the communal understanding, is that we got to go head into that hard thing and work through it. And for me, that is such a promising note for humanity, right? For anything that in this land and age of more technology, more distraction, more opportunity, at least for those of us who are privileged enough to get to spend a lot of time on the internet and be in major economies, we have more distractions and opportunities than ever before. And it's very easy to forget the value of just being human with other humans in the process of that. And I think that anything that can deeply encourage and support that is a huge benefit for society. And I will be the first to say that I think 90, if not 99% of crypto is total garbage. But the tiny sliver that is meaningfully trying to improve and iterate on governance, I genuinely think that, assuming that the Earth is still around a century from now and we haven't nuked ourselves back to the Stone Age, I really think that these innovations out of Web3 and crypto governance will find a meaningful place in society, even if we never use a blockchain. Like I am not tied to the tech, I'm tied to the impact. And I think improving human governance is one of our biggest open problems right now.
So
Yeah, I can. Sorry, Amir, but I can really like that resonates so much with me. Like, I realized this recently. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of background noise here. Okay, maybe it's gone. But I realized this recently. Like the reason that I was so excited about Web3 was not actually the tech, but like the conversations that were happening around it. Like, how can we use this to build fair ecosystems, better incentives, like all those ideas that just float around in that space. That's what actually got me interested. So I really resonate with your what you're saying about like the entire governance space, because it's crazy how many governance experiments are going on in the space right now, and like most of them fail. And as you're saying, like 99% of crypto is just bullshit. But there's like powerful conversations happening in the space, and I think that's like the major. For me, I feel like that's what this ecosystem is adding to society. It's not necessarily like the blockchain or whatever, but like the idea that, okay, if we have a blockchain and that means it's like immutable and it's just transparent, okay, if we use this to govern a society or a community, what does that mean? How do we bake in the governance structure into that? So you've got to be, it just makes stuff more explicit. That's, I think, what I'm saying. It just makes these complicated ideas and important nuances explicit, and you like got to talk about it, got to think about it. Whereas otherwise it's like, yeah, we'll just, I don't know, it'll just like sort itself out. And here it's like, no, we actually, if we want this to work on the blockchain, then we like gotta make sure we get it right. And that's why I think these important conversations come up. And I think, yeah, I agree with you. Like that's those ideas kind of what intrigues me most about the space.
Yeah, yeah. I was just going to quickly say it's so interesting to see how different people get attracted by different elements of the space, and who's coming in for the governance innovation, and the we can play in sort of revitalizing finance or climate change or any other kind of thematic area. And yet there's also like the hardcore folks who are just like, hey, I want to go live on my island with all my wealth and control all my wealth, and like that's my goal here, and like screw humanity. It's like, all right, I guess we're all in this one together. That's fun. So yeah, it creates an interesting landscape of personalities to work through and work with.
Yeah. So speaking of interesting approaches and personal motives, uh, one of the things that is slightly counterintuitive with your approach to problem solving here versus the typical businesses out there is that in a typical business, everybody is, I'm talking to investors, venture capitalists now, and everybody is asking, how can you generalize your solution to apply to more and more and more and more people without much change? But you're taking a very different approach. And I think, hopefully by now our audience has context about why you're taking that approach. Your approach is, can I mobilize people to solve a small problem that will be used as Lego blocks to solve bigger problems? Walk us through that mentality. Like, what are you thinking there? What are some examples of a small? I guess we talked about some examples at the beginning, but what are the concrete building blocks that have to come together to solve a small problems? As a steps towards solving the big problems.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I just really like think, right. And it's not like there are right or wrongs here, it's just different views and approaches. But I very much like taking the system level approach, and that anything complex involves emergence, which means that planning is a futile endeavor to at least some degree, right? Because that's an important distinction, and maybe to hone in on that, of complicated systems versus complex systems. Of things can be complicated, which means they can have a lot of nuance and a lot of details and a lot of interactions and this and that. But a fundamental difference is, will there be things, no matter how complicated implies modelable. It implies that we can break it down to all of its constituent components and understand them. Just, it might take a lot of work and computing power and people and whatever, but it is still possible to get a snapshot of a certain type of process, maybe of a very straightforward, controllable supply chain environment, right? Maybe something like that. But even that, right? And like, I just remember the first time I learned about this, this was like mind bending for such a tiny, silly example, right? But like printer paper and the fact that we haven't solved printer jams, right? I don't know if you've ever stopped yourself and be like, hold up, we're talking about flying cars now for real. We're talking about, hyperloops and going to Mars and all this other stuff. We can't get my printer to not jam? How? And then you actually look into it and you realize that there's this weird thread. I'm already forgetting what the specific subcategory is, but it was something like randomness and chaos theory in certain environments. But it was like tying shoelaces, printer paper, like very simple environments, but you just can't control all the variables. Like, no matter how hard you try, unless you literally do it in a temperature controlled box where every tiny thing is controlled, you will have some randomness, right? That is this sort of emergence of a complex system. There, no matter how well you try to plan the details, one of my favorite phrases in Russians is "the heavens laugh when we make plans." Right? You can plan all you want, but life is complex. We're going to have emergence. We're going to have things come out that we will never be able to deal with. And and this is kind of, for me, comes back to the fundamental ethos of centralization versus decentralization. For me, on an ethos level, centralization is the attempt to exert as much control everywhere where possible at all times, right? That's effectively what true centralization is. It's hardcore central planning to control all of your variables so that you minimize your surprises, right? So and this can also be a contentious statement in some degree, but if anyone listened to Richard Wolff's podcast with Lex Friedman earlier in the year, right, where Richard Wolff is kind of trying to reframe that your average capitalist is actually your biggest central planner, because it's like, well, who's trying to literally buy out the entire supply chain and control every detail, right? You're not opening yourself up to the market. You're actually trying to control the market at every single level, so you could come in at a larger market in the exact way that you want to, and not have to deal with everyone, fending for the same price for widgets that go into it and whatever. So, right, the whole idea of centralization is, how do I maximally exert control? And sometimes that is needed, right? If you need speed and efficiency of decision making, some degree of centralization is needed. So I don't mean to paint this as a dichotomy where one is good and what is bad. We just need to critically assess the pros and cons of each every time we're thinking about this, and understand why we're choosing one or the other, right? The beauty of decentralization, and for me, like, true decentralized systems are mycelium systems in natural forests, right? Like, look, and if you've never learned about how mushrooms grow in the forest, learn about it. That shit's insane. Like, sorry if I can't curse, but it is just one of the most amazing things on this planet. And it's like, every time I learn about it, I'm like, how do I know so little? I need to like go learn about this more. It's just so freaking amazing to see how these living systems can develop so much interdependence and rebalancing and feedback loops and mechanisms of support without ever having what we consider a conscious recognition of each other, right? Without ever saying like, hey, Amir, hey, Carlo, we are all here together. We are doing a thing. That means right? No one had to chart out a governance plan for the forest. It naturally arose until humans started kind of intervening and butchering a lot of that natural balance. So it's so fascinating to think that some of these underlying elements like governance, it's not even about coming up with new conceptions. I really think at this point, it's about learning about everywhere where humans have done things together. And most of that is constrained in some size. So I don't think that the DAOs of the future, decentralized autonomous organizations, I don't think I don't think they should be shooting to have billions of people in them. I don't think that makes sense. For me, anything sustainable on a global level involves networks of networks of networks. It involves collections of small people around what they care about most, connected through some larger apparatus that can give them semblance of economies of scale, the way we get out of traditional highly centralized corporations, without needing to do that, right? There are weirdos like myself who like working at the system level. There are a lot of people who like being much more close to an actual thing or an actual form of impact, right? Working at the system level means you're usually swimming in uncertainty for very long time frames. Most people don't like that. And that's okay. Most people don't need to live up here, because most people don't need to be doing the same thing as most other people. We can have a much more individualized global society that truly speaks to what we are uniquely good at. And given that there's, almost 8 billion of us on the planet, and probability and statistics are what they are, right? As unique as we individually are, we will have overlap with other people in certain domains. And the beauty of technology is that we can use technology as a tool to help find similarity and beauty in the differences, and not use the difference as a point of like, oh, you're different that way, you're different that way, so I'm excluding my group. Sure, that can always be seen. But where some of these really exciting governance primitives kick in for me is that it's trying to think about, how do we realign incentives so that at a system level, even if on the individual level we all want different things, so that at the system level we can all be working towards a singular better vision that we can align on enough, so that we don't want to murder each other and steal each other's stuff and live in a constant zero sum mentality, which isn't a natural truth. That is very much as much of a conditioned part of society as other elements are. So I already forgot where we started, and and I feel enthused. So I got to just check in if I'm still going in the right direction.
No, I'm loving this conversation. Please keep going. But yeah, so the idea, that's the beauty that we're all dreaming about. Most people who are in this space who talk about decentralization, that's the idea that you have small groups of people who really care about one thing, get together about around that one thing, and you can be, as an individual, get together with different groups on different things that you care about, and you just focus on your thing, and then but somehow something beautiful emerges on top of that at the system level, as you're saying, that kind of goes in the direction that we all wanted to go to, for example, right now in our economy, like we're all striving for growth. Like maybe that's wrong, whatever, but we have this kind of certain like shared goal. And the idea is that, yeah, in a decentralized world, everybody gets to be in their community, but the emergent pattern of all those communities, even though they're all focusing on different things, kind of leads to a shared goal, shared progress into one direction. The thing with that, though, like, what is that one shared thing we're going for? Like, and does, I mean, it's not going to be one thing that everybody ends up pursuing in the emergent version of this, but like it's such a hard problem. And I guess, yeah, as you're the person who like loves to be at the system level, like what's your viewpoint there? What do you think it's going to be like a bunch of like, is there going to be one, so it's like turtles all the way down, right? You have small communities who like get together in a bigger community, get together in an even bigger community. Is there going to be like one big world community made up of all these millions and billions of tiny little communities? Or like how is it going to be, like west and east, or like north and south, or like whatever? Like, do you see a world where like everybody gets together in this one, like it's weird, like this one decentralized community? Like, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I very much do. I very much do get what you're saying, and I very much don't think that's a realistic vision. So
Yeah.
that's not like I would love for that to happen. I too am highly skeptical of the reality of us getting there, and that's where it's like the common binding end goal just needs to be basic enough to get us together. And I really liked Daniel Schmacht. I also heard this on a Lex Friedman podcast, but with Daniel Schmachtenberger, which I think was like a 5-hour marathon episode. But Daniel talked about, and his institute and work is great in this kind of thinking, but he was talking about at the end of the day, we need to think about how do we maximize binding versus cleaving, and binding being something that brings together socially versus cleaving, it brings people apart socially. And what is pro-social versus anti-social, is in what generally gets people wanting to do more things with more people versus wanting to isolate and focus on their own. And that intersection of binding and pro-social is as close to a general singular mission that we can come up with, of pretty much, let's not be dead, right? Like, let's not all kill each other. And that's a fancier way of saying, right, like pro-social and binding is how do we do the things that over time keep encouraging us to want to hate each other less. And like that's as something at that level is as much as whatever's going to work on the global scale. Because I think and coming back to Web3, blockchains, etc., right? The only things, in my opinion, that should be global protocols are the money layer, right? Are things at that level of like, yeah, money should be international. Like there could be good uses of community currency, etc. But there's absolutely an argument to be made of why there should be a single global currency, right? Which arguably today might be the dollar or the euro or the yuan or something like that. But all of those are controlled by their respective government agencies. And so, right, I do see a benefit to having a global international protocol, say such as Bitcoin or Ethereum, or the new one that we'll see 20 years from now that actually is the one that sticks around forever. Who knows what it'll be? But in my mind, the more global you have of a protocol, the easier governance needs to become. Because if you then really expect people to get into a weekly town hall and then do daily snapshot votes and a lot of what is expected in Web3 right now, you're going to deal with what Web3 is dealing with right now, which is, 0.25% of your community will actually partake in governance decisions. And then how is this any better than where we started if it's 100 people making all the choices at the end of the day? So I think that's where, right, if at the global scale, narrower decision making is asked, where it's like, hey, we want to move this percentage up 0.01 up or 0.01 down, right? That is an easier thing for people to vote on than like, hey, should we start a grants program? Or like, hey, do we want to have a social impact bend to our org, right? If you try doing that with 8 billion people, nothing's ever going to happen. But if you try to create more streamlined of like, hey, everyone, you have 3 weeks to vote on this thing, and anyone in the world with an internet connection, and here's the 5 points you need to know about where this tiny decision goes one way or the right, you can actually break it down to streamline it slightly more. Though I can't imagine that's actually going to have like robust participation in any kind of way. But I could see that at least lending itself with some logic to a global environment. once we're talking about like and I'm just making this up, but let's say we're talking about like a DeSci collector NFT investment DAO, it's like, you don't need to be global. Why do you even need 100 people, like 50 people? Like, have fun with that already, right? So like, I see the benefit, like Nouns right now is a project I'm interested in watching how that one grows. Like, their treasury is huge at this point. And I'm always so fascinated. It's like, cool, but is this kind of really all just about the vibes? Like, is anything actually going to change here at the end of the day? And that's where, like, as much as I'm into the vibes and all, I do think we need a little more substance than that. And so, yeah, I don't know, right? In terms of the specifics of how you actually get that to change, I think it's a tremendously long road. I am not one to foolishly think that this is something that will be solved in our timeline, in our lifetime. But if it's right, there are certain forces that seem to be playing into slightly more of the binding and pro-social side, and very much thinking, and why I'm interested in DeSci and Scurf specifically is thinking about knowledge and information in open environments, right? Because especially the US up until through the 80s, highly centralized knowledge economy, right? You kind of learned everything through like, like two or three television broadcasters, and that was your like relied upon news sources. And with that, I'm forgetting the name of the legal case, but in the 80s that ended up breaking it, and then like Fox formed, and then a bunch of others started forming, and then we got our decentralized news landscape. I don't know that that's better for healthy discourse in the US at least, right? And so these ideas of how do you have open-ended decentralized knowledge systems that are not in favor of the builder of the system or of chaos is still an open question. So anyone that I see playing around with like how do we make systems of knowledge better, I immediately get excited because I'm not going to pretend to have any answers or solutions, but if we don't experiment, then we're never going to find anything better. And so I am very okay recognizing that everything that I'm devoting my time to could be wrong. And I am very okay with that because at least we will then know that that is wrong and that something else has a better chance of being right. And that is in turn moving us in a healthier direction, in my opinion.
Yeah, damn, that's a big mission. But I love the approach of like accepting, you know what, maybe it's wrong, but then at least we know. Yeah, man, what a conversation. I Yeah, there's so much to unpack, but I think we're kind of running out of time. But yeah, I'm excited to see how Scurf will facilitate conversations of that kind of, having complicated conversations about important things, but in a way that make them accessible to people to participate and form their opinion on. I'm very, very curious. And yeah, wish you the best of luck. I'm excited to see how that's going to turn out.
Yeah, for
Yeah, and
sure.
we're
And
I was just
sorry,
going to
go.
quickly say we're very interested in playing around with things like soul-bound tokens or non-transferable NFTs or any versions of badging. Say to like if you're in a forum or a discourse-based environment, how can we give you a contrarian badge? Right, to say that like, hey, we're not promoting you being a mean to all of the other people here, but yes, respectfully come and disagree. Yes, like how do you actually culturally and socially promote the things that we know to be part of healthy discourse? What does it mean to embody that in an open system? So that's where we're slowly trying to think of how to actually run experiments like that, and I'm really excited for that.
Definitely. Thank you so much for this fun conversation. Definitely the question of creating the infrastructure for a decentralized knowledge economy is very, very interesting. Definitely, as you said, there has been a lot of movements and changes over the years, and excited to see where it goes. I really like that you emphasized, the more important part is the fact that we are thinking through these problems versus the specific technology that we are using to set these up. And in aggregate intellect, we are also thinking a lot about this question of bringing together machines and communities and have them collaborate on a mission like this. So uh, one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I think you kind of alluded to it as well, is a lot of the time in our systems we create data driven user feedback as we make product decisions, and the product adapts to the behavior of the user. So I feel like some idea around their dotted line to the more idealistic views of governance that DAOs have will be the scalable solution that we end up with. Again, that's a complete conjecture, but a data driven, more advanced version of voting, like just in time voting, combined with ideas that we are ideating in the decentralized space, will probably give us a solution that can actually happen, rather than we are doing this thing, let's vote on it. So very very interesting to see where data, AI, blockchain, governance, all of these will overlap to create the solution that we'll have for knowledge sharing in the future. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Eugene. Just as the last question, what's the verdict? What do you want people to think about? You've given people a lot to think about differently, but if you were to pick one thing, and just 1-2 sentences, what should people think about differently after hearing this conversation?
Yeah, and I guess I'll tie that to like a small semantic thing I wanted to hop on from before. So I know you were saying with kind of knowledge economy, and I really like thinking of it more in knowledge ecosystem rather than economy, just due to the pure implication of right, an economy is a place where everything is of transactional value. And I guess on that note, then, right, it's so easy, especially if you're living in the West and especially in the US, where everything is like, oh, transactional and individualistic, and in that environment, and to just think about what are the areas in your own life where you gain so much value and fulfillment, and what are the actual kind of interactions that lead to that, and how many of them genuinely involve money along the way versus how much of them involve the certain people in your life that fill certain roles. Or is it idea based, or is it that you get to give back, or is it that you get to do a certain activity? And to just think about, how do we, right, if you feel those nuggets in yourself that provide the most fulfillment, what is one thing then in the next week that you could do for someone else to feed that well of positivity and joy in them? And like, how do we bring that kind of mentality into where we work and into where we live, and just seeing where that can take us over time?
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Carla. What will you think about differently after this conversation?
I mean, what Eugene just said was so beautiful. I think I'll just think about that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Eugene and Carla, for joining me for this conversation. It was a lot of fun, and I'm sure we can continue this for hours, but unfortunately, we're out of time. Thanks so much for joining us today, and hope to see you next week with another episode of Deep Random Talks. Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much for having me.
All right.